printing all, and by printing I mean like I guess committing to your MIDI regions and all the music you produced. And so that would be the producing side where you're uh, playing on the keyboard, recording all of that stuff, recording some vocals maybe even, or arranging and all of that, and adding small effects. Then once we convert all of those types of things into audio, we're now committed to all of that, and we could really focus in on the overall sound of how all of these different instruments will blend together, how hard they might hit, or how loud they are, and things like that. So let's just take a look at these first four tracks. I'm just going to solo these out. I'm going to hit S on the keyboard solo, or hit the solo button. And we'll notice some few things: lead, ARP, ARP2, and pad. So you want to, when you're jumping into a mix, you really want to understand what music you're working with, or what type of pieces you're working with. If it's not your own music, of course, you'll want to listen to this a few times before diving into making any decisions or anything like that. I produced this piece or this track myself, so I'm pretty familiar with how it goes. So I'm just going to solo these out, and we're going to take a listen for a few seconds. I'm just going to put it right before we have all three parts together. And Justin, let me know to make sure the audio is still good. Cool. So what I like to start thinking about is, or start doing is really just identifying, making mental notes, or even jotting those down on a piece of paper or a notepad or something on the computer. I like to pick out things that stick out to me, such as, let's see, in this pad here, we might have a little bit of that low end bass and that low rumble. And I'm thinking big picture here right now, where I know there's going to be a bass pattern. And this is something, of course, you're going to need to listen to your music to make these decisions or to identify these things. So I know that there's an 808 in this track. So that brings me to the conclusion that I won't really need the bass or that those low end frequencies from really any other instrument other than maybe the kick and some other effects possibly. So that's one thing that I need to note. Also, the ringiness or the tinniness or the sharpness or the buzziness of this lead here. And I'll solo those out, or that lead, real quick. That's all we need to hear. In mixing and with working with clients, you might also have a lot of weird descriptive words you might hear or use, such as those things that I just listed, like tinniness. Brightness is more common or easier to identify, and things like sharpness, static, and stuff like that. So bear with me as I use some terms like that. I'm usually referring to where the audio lies in the spectrum of, or the frequency spectrum, from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, or 20K hertz. And so our ears only hear down to 20. We can feel lower than that, but our ears are only going to essentially capture, if you may, from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Of course, over time, as your ears get a little damaged, and mine have, I have a lot of experience with marching percussion and those loud drums and very damaging sounds and things like that, where your ears will kind of only hear maybe up to 19K or 18, 17, 16, things like that. But we still want to note that we are working with that full spectrum from 20 to 20K hertz. So I know that in this lead here, I'm probably going to be having to dial those down or tame those frequencies up there. This ARP and this ARP track here, solo just this one. There's a little poppiness to it, hitting me in the throat almost, which I will identify as those mid-range frequencies. I'll need to keep note of that too. And then we have a lot of drums and percussion and effects. And I'm going to solo those out and grab some of these other effects too. So everything but the melodic pieces. Melodic meaning things that land on a note on the keyboard that you can perceive as in a key of some sort. So I'm going to solo all these out, and we're going to take a listen here too. So now we have a ton of different pieces of music to work with, and that's going to be the challenge in this mix, I think, is getting those all to fit in together and place them in different places and things like that. So now we can start making some decisions, which we're going to start with balance of the music of each track. And we'll call that gain staging. That's the process of getting the level of gain on each track to where there's a nice balance between everything. You can hear what's important, things that are less important are quieter, things like that. And then we'll also do some panning or balancing from the in the stereo image from the left channel to the right channel. And these are all decisions that you're going to need to make in the mix to create a nice cohesive piece of music. And without cluttering, well, kind of the wrong cadence there. Without cluttering any individual space in the music. I like to think of a mix as filling in an elevator with as many people as possible or as many people as needed. And in this case, we have 30 tracks. So we have 30 different people. This is just an analogy. 30 different people we need to fill in this elevator with. We have larger people that take up more space, and we have smaller things like a hi-hat. Let's do things like that. Very small. Everything's important, of course, though. So we need to make all these fit and place them in the little in-between spaces and get everything into the right. This is what we'll bring up the point of image. Things to the right, to the left, further in the back of the elevator or the room, whatever you want to call it, or the image. And then things right in front of you, right in your face, as if somebody was talking right to you, directly at you. Okay, so I'm going to open up the mixer here. And a mixer in any DAW will look somewhat similar. In Logic Pro, we have the entire channel strip of each track. So we have some settings that we can save later. We have these pieces here that are just kind of like quick views of our compression, our EQ, and then we have the input, which we don't really have to worry about because all of the audio is printed here. Then we have some sends, which we'll use for some effects. Then we have the output. Right now, everything outputs to this stereo out, which will be, in this case, the master bus or the mix bus. We'll say mix bus considering that this is called master. And then we have some group. We're not going to use that. Automation, hopefully we'll have time to touch on. Then we have our pan and our fader. And this is our meter here that we can keep an eye on. So first thing we need to make sure is that nothing is clipping. In Logic Pro, the number on the right, the meter that shows on the right, we'll open up this instrument here because it's softer. The number on the right is the output that is being sent to whatever the output is sent to, or the level. The fader, the number on the left is the fader level. So if we turn this down a little bit, let's do just -1. We'll notice that the output now shows -1 on top of that, or added to that -1.8. Now, if this number is greater than the output or the fader, the level that the fader is set to, so in this case, if the fader is at 0 and this output is above 0, we know that we're clipping. But if this was turned down and this was, say, only -1, so it's not technically above 0, so visually speaking, it's not clipping. But in that sense, what you're doing in that case is that you're just turning down the clipped audio, and that audio could be clipped either from the source, meaning this audio itself is just above 0 or peaking above 0, or in the chain of effects, audio effects. So we want to make sure that nothing is clipping. We're going to check on that real quick. I'm pretty confident that we're safe in terms of clipping any audio. Things are a little bit louder, as we saw. Some things were hitting exactly 0, but as long as we're not clipping anything, we're gonna be in the clear to move forward. If it was clipping, we might want to turn down the audio itself, or even just throw on a gain plugin. Every DAW should have something like this. We have a gain plugin here, which we can just bring down the gain so that it reaches, in this case, since all faders are at 0, we want to keep everything below 0, right? You also notice this balance, these other options here. We won't worry about those today. But everyone should have a gain plugin. Okay, so let's check it out. Let's turn everything down so we can start fresh and bring this stereo out just back to 0. And then we're gonna create a cycle here so that we can just hear this loud part of the music with as many instruments possible. And for me, I work a lot with pop and hip hop music, so I'm a little biased here, but I believe that the 808, the kick, the snare even, and then the melodies in terms of priority, in terms of priority and volume and things like that would go 808 being the most important, the kick. Sometimes I flip those around. The kick might be more important than the 808. The snare or the clap or something like that usually I'll put above kind of everything. And then the melody will fit in there, and then all the other percussion I can kind of sprinkle around. That's very, there's a lot, okay, so on that note, there's a lot of how-tos I've seen on social media, things like that, that give you kind of these like step-by-step, oh, make your 808 hit -6 dB and then balance everything above that or below that and all things like that. Anything that says you have to do it this way, I stay away from. It's fun to look at what people are recommending, but it's just so subjective, and it's so dependent on the overall piece of music that you're working on in every track that you can't really ever start or you can't really ever follow those guidelines. But for me, I like to start with kind of bringing up this 808. So we'll kind of make some moves, and I'll talk a little bit less so we can see a little bit more than tell. I'm just going to start bringing in some instruments and start balancing these things. And again, we're not going to touch. We'll get into the pan, but we're gonna stick in everything in the center right now. And I should have done more organization. That should have been a good note there. I'm trying to think. Okay, here we go. Sometimes, depending on the mix, you kind of just want to take an estimate just so you can get some faders up. If you're kind of getting through it with a loop, even though something doesn't play. But if I know that this snare is going to be pretty similar to this one, I can bring those about to the same. So we'll just kind of continue. I'll try to move a little bit faster. Let's get into it. Now you notice that here, these faders are quite low compared to the drums on this other side, like the 808. You could start by adding the gain plugin on everything and balancing that way so that you can have a more even playing field. But in the case of the digital world, I'm not too worried about it. I might make adjustments later. I'm more focused on the sound. I don't really care what I'm seeing or anything like that. And I think that's a big point right there. A big takeaway is to kind of let go of what you're seeing and just focus more on what you're hearing. Of course, I'm mixing on headphones, so whatever you may be listening on, and also with Zoom quality, you might be hearing something different than me. It's all super subjective and dependent on your listening environment. We'll just continue on here. Hi-hats, I usually like to let the hi-hat kind of be the motion of the ocean, you know, like kind of just let it move the track along and push the music along, just like a drummer would in an acoustic environment. We'll just start there, just so I'm not spending too much time trying to perfect this. Okay, so let's kind of just focus in here. I want to group these together as any logical way you find fit, depending on your mix. In this case, since these are all the melody instruments or things like that, melodic instruments. So I'll create a stack, and I'll show you what happened. This is a Logic Pro thing, I believe, summing stack, that term. So now we have a new track here that's called Sum1. Really what this is an auxiliary track, and what it does is it takes all of the audio, instead of all of these instruments outputting to the stereo output or the mix bus or anything like that. They will output now to the auxiliary track. So in terms of processing, you can process each individual track as is, and then it will be met with any audio effects that you put onto this auxiliary track. So if I want all of these to be brighter, I can do that here and basically save me some CPU, save me some time, save me some effort by just putting an EQ on this auxiliary track and boosting up those high frequencies. Now, I already know, because we chatted about it a second ago, that this pad, and really I don't need any of that low end from any of these instruments. I can just go ahead and throw on an EQ here, because I want to get all of this unneeded, unnecessary audio, essentially, out of the way for what needs to be there, like in this case, the 808 or the kick. So I'm going to start bringing this low cut or high pass filter. It's called a low cut because we're cutting all the lows. It's called a high pass too because we're only letting the high frequencies pass, or anything above this point. So we have what frequency the band is put to, the slope, of the filter, and the Q in this case is like a bringing up of resonance. So we're gonna cut all these lows from all these melody instruments. Now I'm not gonna cut everything down here. Even we're gonna bring those out just so we can hear what information is at this range around here between 100 and 200. So it's a little muddy, but to me that's gonna add overall atmosphere to the music. And so it is a little heavy here, but I don't want to cut it completely or begin to cut it with this low pass. You might want to go about it like this and opening up the slope so it doesn't cut too much. If we let me turn this one off. If we look at, if we're using our eyes to mix, of course, never do that. But if we look at what's going on here, is even though this band is set to 230 hertz, at 230 hertz, it's really only pulling it down by a few dBs. It doesn't reach kind of that infinity point for a while, and that's with this slope. This is how many decibels per octave, and an octave in terms of the frequency is either double or half going down the frequency. So from 200 hertz, it'll go down to 100 hertz, which will be 6 decibels, and then we can see that on the graph here. It reaches about -6 by that point. So you could go about it doing it that way so that we're just kind of bringing down that little low end, low mids a little bit. I want a sharper curve here, maybe about there. And then we'll bring down those, that just a little bit. So now what we basically did is just made 4 moves all in one by saving us some time here. And then we'll name this track melodic just so we can get that out of here and close that out. And then we can always keep track of the melodic. And then of course we can turn this down or automate this one track and it'll do everything to all of the tracks. Okay. Now let's unsolo this. Now I also know that in my 808 I don't really need too much of the high end, and notice how you don't really see anything over here. Now there might not be anything audible, of course, but there could be some little leftover harmonics up there at very minuscule levels that are essentially just taking up room and using up headroom that we'll need later on. So I'm going to high cut or low pass the 808. And even just bring it back just a little bit to where I hear it take off a little bit of bite to it. Because if we need it, we can add that, get that in there with a little bit of distortion or saturation. Now, I always like to put a little just with the channel EQ on Logic Pro, you can just turn on that low cut filter or high pass filter, whatever you want to call it. Kind of sharpen this up and just leave it there at 20 hertz, just so that any little information down there isn't taking up headroom again. Now this kick is a little bit lost. I'm gonna just try and see what happens if we just kind of move the faders up and down. And we can still use our faders throughout the mix, and I'm not really worried about the order of whether we're changing the faders by the end of the mix or the beginning. As long as we get like that starting point with the gain stage in, that's good for me. What it looks like or when you do things doesn't really matter. I always say like I'm sure we've heard and seen kind of people saying like no one's really going to ask you like, oh, any of these questions really, when you mix it, when they hear the product, that's what they care about. Not really, oh, how did you go about mixing it? Of course, there's the engineers and things like that that will have those questions, but the general public or your general audience, as long as it sounds good, it sounds good, right? At the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do is just make music that sounds good, or make music sound better, things like that. So let me note something here about the stereo out level. This is the entire output, or the entire sum of all of the audio going in and out, or I should say just going out. And notice it's around -6, and I'm sure we've heard that before as a good rule of thumb to keep your mix at around -6 dBs. Now, I've been working on either not worrying about that lately, or just using that as a very, very loose guide, for lack of a better term. And to kind of speed the gun or keep the ball rolling, I've noticed that I haven't really noticed a difference in terms of even once you get to the master process, because you can always throw a gain plugin on the stereo out and turn everything down to where you need it. So I'm not really going to mix to where I'm trying to keep things at a certain level. I'm going to just mix to where it sounds good. And if it gets too loud, I'll make note of that and try to fix that, of course, so that we're not clipping. So I like this little effect here, so I want to bring that one out. And that one's a little... Yeah, so we're just kind of going through and finding what's important and what's not important, and taking care of things as we move along. We don't really have to do so much all at once. Of course, now if you are, say, on a deadline, of course you'll want to kind of use your better judgment to make decisions before having to even, or you'll get to the point, I should say, that you can make those decisions before even hearing some things, things like panning or stuff like that, just so you can get something going to where you can hear, and then you can tweak and move along like that. So it sounds good to me. I'm going to bring up some more of these effects. Cool. Let's talk about hi-hats real quick. For me, I enjoy a brighter hi-hat. And so I'm going to throw an EQ on this real quick and just bring these little high-end frequencies up with a high shelf, meaning it reaches a maximum of, in this case, 3.3 decibels, and then that carries on forever and ever above the point you put it at, or at the point that it reaches that range. And so with the hi-hats, usually that little bright sizzle is around 8K to 10K, most depending on the pitch of your hi-hat too will matter. 10K and up is usually a good place for me. So it gives a little bit more life to them. And then again, on that note of you might not be hearing something down there, I'm going to bring this high pass up. Now I might also boost a little bit in these this little mid-range, just to get the hi-hat a little bit more body, not the mid-range, just a little bit lower, around 4K, 5K. One pro tip that I kind of learned, what I used to learn, teach myself, I guess, is really just crank things a lot to where you really hear what a plugin is doing, or what one parameter may be doing. and then being able to learn how to dial those things back, because once you start cranking things like reverbs and effects like that, it's really easy to like enjoy it and keep it there. And so over time, you'll learn to kind of dial things back and make more light brush strokes on the mix rather than go in with a Sharpie and draw things in that are just kind of there, very clear and things like that. So you notice there's a little bit of like thickness in the hi-hat around here. So that just overall enhanced the entire hi-hat there. I'm going to do some more grouping too. Again, grouping is so important. Cannot stress that enough. And I either if I'm really just prepping for a quick mix, then I'll do all the grouping and the organization first. I'm just gonna get some drums together. So we have our hi-hat. We'll get these effects out of the way. Bring those down here, sure. And then we have our snare. We'll keep those as a group. I don't want to include the kick because I want to mix the kick as if it's a bass instrument with the 808. So I want to keep those separate outside of the drums. I'll grab any of these and bring these up to these hi-hats or cymbals, things like that. Perk, you might want to consider like little, any type of percussion type instruments. So I'll group those together. Maybe that shaker too could go in there. And then I'll just call that drums. I'll throw in the shaker too. Put it into the bus and then bring that down there. Let me try it this way. There we go. Okay, so now all of these are bussed into these drums. Now, compression basically brings your peaks down while bringing the everything up, I should say. Or might not, you might not want to add what we call makeup gain, depending on where you are in terms of the level. I might use compression as a way to actually get things quieter in general, or I might use it to purposely bring things to get things much louder. It really depends on what you need to do. So in this case, we just want kind of all these drums to not have any drums that really stick out too much from the rest of the group of drums. But we also want to kind of give them some flavor. And with the Logic Pro compressor or and a lot of other compressors, you have different versions or different models or like circuit modeling of either digital compression, of course. Of course, it's digital, but modeled after like authentic hardware. Now, these aren't really clones or trying to be anything like that, but in terms of, and I don't want to, this is not a compression masterclass, but this compressor with Logic Pro has some different models of real hardware, and they're not at all going to sound the same really, or try to be, but they do have a good sound. And so these might color, and when I say color, we'll kind of add a little, I hit the enter key on this numpad, color the instrument or the bus, in this case that we're putting on, or the auxiliary track, in a way that you wouldn't really just be boosting higher frequencies or anything like that. You're actually adding some distortion or saturation, or in this case color. We even have a distortion knob here that we can add some soft distortion, hard, or clip. And these are just different types of distortion or limiting. And I love using this soft distortion setting here. We're going to turn off this auto gain because Logic likes to assume that I want it to be extremely loud all of a sudden. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm also going to turn off the auto attack and release. And we're just going to see what happens. I'm going to solo out the drums. Cool. So it's really picking up on a little bit of the hi-hats and definitely picking up on that snare drum that sits on top of everything. And it's turning down about 2 dBs, and to me that's good. It's very gentle. I'll show you the off and soft distortion, and so this is just a way so you can get an idea of what that color may be. Now, they're all pretty similar. It depends on the level that's coming into the compressor. The soft definitely brightens it up, gives a little bit more body, and makes it a little bit louder. So we'll stick with that one. I like the way that that's sounding. Now that snare is a bit quieter now. I'm gonna open up this attack so that we hear more of the transient of the snare. Let it come out, and then I'm gonna keep the release pretty quick so that once that snare is detected by the compressor, it doesn't take too long to kind of pull back on how much it's turning the audio down, and that would cause all the percussion, like the hi-hats, to kind of create this weird kind of ducking of the hi-hat or swell of the hi-hats, which we don't want. So I want a fast release, so it just picks up on the peak, and then it takes care of that, and then it lets go. Now I don't depending on what I'm working with vocals, I'm really going into the ratio and working with that, just because there's such a live instrument, just such a of a vocal is so dynamic, and you can do some, or everyone's voice is going to be different. I've been more often leaving the ratio at 2 or maybe 4, for most instruments that I'm throwing a compressor on, and then I'll just kind of draw back that threshold. This just keeps things not less detailed, of course, but keeps the flow going, I guess, and you're not spending too much time working on one compressor and taking away of kind of really the purpose of music. And I think that's a big takeaway there is when we get into a mix like this and we're like, oh, levels, volume, EQ, compression, reverb, how far, how big, how much delay should I use, all these effects and things like this. I've noticed that when I get too deep into that mindset of really perfecting the mix, that I listen to the demo, and I really am taking away the purpose of the music. And on that note of listening to the demo or listening back to the demo is, of course, you're going to love the demo, and the mix is going to have no chance if you already love the demo. But I think that's one because, you listen to the demo too many times, repetition creates preference. Okay. But I think it's because in the moment of creating a demo and just working with the artist or just working and making the music and then bouncing it out and loving it the music was made in the moment, and you hear it as like you hear that moment. Whereas you get into the mix and you have all these scientific, audio engineer type processes and things like that you're considering it, and you're working more of, and of course we are called mix engineers. You're working more as an engineer rather than a musician or an artist. Now, I think you'll progress and get to the point where you can work as an engineer while feeling like an artist. But that also has to do with how hands on how hands on are you with the person you're mixing for. Is it your own music? Is it someone else's that wants it a very specific way? Do you have a creative authority over the music? And when you do, that's where I think you want to stay away from getting too deep into the science behind mixing audio and audio in general, and really think about the art and really the purpose of the music and the message you're trying to convey, especially if it's your own music. Oh, crazy delay.
Is there delay when it comes through right now?
Yeah.
Oh man, I wanted to ask you some questions, but maybe I can't ask you questions if there's delay going on. Is that any better if I turn that off?
Check, check. It's still there. I you can ask and then I will just wait until you're done talking and you can mute.
There you go. Okay. Why don't I just do that? So, yeah, I wanted to bring up some questions that have been coming through the live stream that we've been doing, and I haven't seen it too much questions in the chat, and you're welcome to ask questions there too. But from the live stream, you mentioned something about the -6 dB for mixing, and I've heard that that's to leave room for a mastering engineer to then give some space for that. Is that what you kind of generally have that from? Hear that from?
I'll mute you just so I don't get distracted. No, yeah. So that's what I was saying is and I've recently heard this being used is saying any competent mastering engineer knows they can put a gain plug in or turn down the gain of your mix. And so I'm really just mixing to sound as good as possible rather than think I need to mix, a little bit quieter. And of course, you can just you can turn your volume up, but that's also just like, the mastering engineer can turn your audio down. So yeah, -6 is definitely a good goal, and I'm sure the mastering engineer will appreciate that. But uh, if you're not clipping and even if there's little or no headroom, depending on if you're bouncing out at 32-bit, 24-bit, I mean that's when you're gonna be like, oh, should it be down a little bit? At the end of the mix, I've not noticed any difference than at the end of the mix bringing all the faders down. If I have automation, of course, I'm going to make sure I'm doing that. Or even throwing a gain plugin at the end of each chain or each track and bringing all of it down just to where, the peak is maybe at -6, -5, and it doesn't go above that. So it's not something that I'm going to consciously think about. It's just something that I know will help. But if I'm going to do my own mastering or I'm sending it to a master, I can turn it down before I bounce it. I can quite literally bring the stereo out down and fix it that way. Yeah, I hope that answers that.
All right, awesome, man. I just wanted to ask a few more questions here, and as we go out, we only have about 5 to 10 more minutes here. And it's a pretty quick hour, and I just want to give people a heads up that normally we have 36 hours per mixing and mastering 101 201 to go through a lot of the things that Kyle's talking about in regard to the details of compression, EQ, and reverb. Um, I haven't, so I did see compression and a lot of EQ, which gives a lot of space for different instruments. In regard to delay by a millisecond or reverb, do you mess around with millisecond delays to place things forward or back in the mix at all?
I'll mute again. So a pre-delay, 100%. Now, it's just like side chaining, if we're considering that too, where you have some space for the dry audio to come through before hearing, say, the reverb or the delay. Now, a delay is, I like to keep time synced, tempo synced, other than what we call a slap delay, which is a very fast and short, very low feedback or a very short tail delay that just kind of makes it sound like, and I mix it in very faintly to where there's a little bit of slapback if say it's on a vocal that it sounds like there's like one little bounce off the wall, not so much a room reverb, but a little bounce and ever so slightly mixed in can give the vocal just a little bit of body, and that I might use a millisecond delay, just to kind of make it fit in and enhance the vocal rather than kind of create this weird room tone. Now, with a pre-delay on a reverb, 100%, depending on the instrument, if it's on a vocal, around like 16 milliseconds and to 50 even, 50 depending on the tempo of, or depending on like the pace of the vocal might be too much. But usually I found like 14, 16 milliseconds. That's usually my go-to when I'm setting the pre-delay on a reverb, so that the first little transient of the vocal comes through and then the reverb sings out. And that's if I'm not even gating the reverb or things like that. I brought up this calculator. If I'm going to, if I don't have tempo sync, or if it's a pre-delay that doesn't have it and it's only milliseconds, you can divide 60,000. I think this is the way. Haven't had to do it in a while. By your tempo, and that's how many. That's the amount of milliseconds per quarter note. So at 175, I can, if I wanted a quarter note pre-delay, I can set to 342 milliseconds. I I might have done the math wrong, but that sounds right to me.
Yeah, it does sound right. And then from there, you can then divide that by 4 to get a 16th note, divide that again to get a 32nd note, etc.
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, I'm so sorry that there's a delay whenever I turn on. I guess we have to just keep on like muting back and forth or something. Um, so just one last question came through, and I thought we could do this as our final question that we take. And if you guys have any other questions, you guys are welcome to contact us at sf@garnishmusicproduction.com. We have over 20 different teachers involved with our online and in-studio lessons. And Kyle Boydston here is about to be teaching our mixing and mastering course starting on, is it the 24th of this month?
25th?
25th, Sunday the 25th. Awesome. There it is right there. Brought it right up. From 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's 4 hours a day. And you do that for about 9 weeks to go through our 36-hour course. And for anyone that wants a super good deal, discount on that, just email us and we will tell you a really great rate. And a lot of people are asking us for individual private lessons because they want this individuation of like my mix and like what I want to do. And really, these classes are with like 2 to 5 people generally. So it's very individuated. You can ask Kyle specific questions around your mix, and you can actually learn from your cohort as well. So I just want to give you guys a heads up on that before we head out. I apologize, my camera decided to die right when this started. So you can't see me, but you can hear me. So the last question, Kyle, um, do you generally want to use yourself as mixing and mastering, or do you try and bring a second ear in? And does that help? Or maybe do you actually like take a space from your mix for a while to come back to master it? Is there any technique like that? And I'm going to mute myself right now.
That is a great question and big answer, but I'll try to sum it up. Yes, use other ears, use other resources. Of course, use honest ears. And I always love to get, I ask people, oh, what do you think? Do you think about the level of the vocal on this, or what do you think about the big effect? People that have no idea uh, uh, about music engineering or anything like that. Um, that's a great tool for me, is just asking people with no music experience what they think, and it lets me take a step back as a musician and being like so all the time thinking about this stuff, and letting your brain kind of get clockwork type. Yes, so on that note, yes, mastering now, it's a common practice that you're always outsourcing the mastering, but we all know budgets be tight. And I like, so in that case, if I'm doing my own mastering, what I'll do usually if I'm offering like a full mix on someone's music is I just tell them like I'm not a mastering engineer per se, full time or anything, but I will give you my master. And what I'll do is before I master it, I'll take a few days, maybe one or two, if it's under a pretty close or a pretty deadline. Sorry. Um, so that my ears get a little refresh, so that when I listen back, I can go, wow, that's what it needs. That, I guess that would be more in a mixed sense, is coming back to it. But with the master, you want to look at the music as okay, what does this really just little final touches need? You have to look at it in the grand scheme of things rather than, oh, the vocal needs to come down. Oh, the piano right there is too loud. We need to automate that. And that's looking at it as a mixing engineer, uh, as a mix engineer's perspective, where if you come to your own mix, you have to look at it as the grand scheme of things, and what little type of flavor does it need? How loud? How should it, what should the dynamic range be like? And big questions like that, like is this a club? Is this club music? Like, does it need to have that like push on the master chain that you can give it? So yeah, if you're doing, it's common practice to outsource the mastering. It's definitely a good option. But if you're doing it yourself, definitely take a day or two or even more away from it because the mastering process is just so much different than the mixing. So you don't really need to, stay fresh on the mix to go into the master.
Awesome, Kyle. Thank you so much for your time and really appreciate the questions that came through from online. For anyone that has seen us via our Zoom webinar or our Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook, that's where we are doing this live stream. And we do these live streams almost daily from our Garnish network, which is from many locations worldwide. We have 8 different locations worldwide. We're the San Francisco branch. You can contact us at sf.garnishmusicproduction.com. You can sign up for short courses, which are 18 to 36 hours, all the way up to our producer program, 120 hours, and then our academy, which is 430 hours, counting studio time. People that join our academy have access to all the studios worldwide and can take classes in different locations for free. So I believe we're the only teaching facility that is actually doing this worldwide. And our prices are literally about 1/10 of what you'd pay for a university or a similar school. And it's very specific to the style of music, the genre, whether you're a DJ, which DAW that you use. We have theory classes, and we also have music business classes. So please contact us. And once again, apologies for not seeing my face. I love to be more personal, but you got Kyle's beautiful face here to represent. He's teaching the next mixing and mastering class starting this Sunday, the 25th, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And anyone that contacts us via phone or email and lets us know that you saw us here, we will give you a screaming discount on that class. So please contact us, and we really look forward to speaking with you soon. Kyle, thank you so much for being with us here. And I'm going to sign off on all of our accounts. If you want to stay on for the Zoom and attendees, La France Yabrau, if you want to ask any questions specifically to Kyle, now's your opportunity when I'm closing down our streaming. And we are SF Garnish Music Production. Thank you so much for being with us.